Today we will talk about quality reports and if that matters. And there's a given answer on that, isn't there? Yes, quality matters. Quality of the case report matters. Otherwise, we wouldn't be discussing it here today. Why is it important? Well, you need good cases to make good judgment of the cases when it comes to evaluation and signal. What goes around comes around, which means that the important thing about your case reports and your database is to use it, to utilize the information that is there. But you can never expect to get anything useful out of the database if you haven't put in quality reports into the database. So when you come to analyzing your case reports, it's too late to do anything about the quality of them. That has to be done at the input of the information. And good quality reports is a worldwide safety concern, because the data you put into your databases, you get from your reporters, are put into your database and forwarded so that everybody around the world through vigiGrade can use the information. So it's not just a concern for yourself and your country, it's a worldwide concern. And if we have poor data, we may make wrong conclusions from the data, or if we can't trust the information, maybe we'll have to wait for more information, new case reports to be reported, and that will delay the process. There's, of course, in using this data, an issue about quality of data, quantity of data, and timeliness. You need to capture the essence of every case report. And of course, in a database, add structure. And that encoding, that means that free text information should be coded into specific data fields. You've talked about reporting forms, so you know what it should look like. Narrative information is very important and useful, but the information in a narrative shouldn't just stay there. It should go into the structured data fields as much as possible, because it's only the structured data fields that you can use for searching the data. And the narrative information will add information to the case. Stay true. When you code your data, put it into the database, you shouldn't over-interpret information, what the reporter has told you. If you, for example, get information about symptoms, and you have several symptoms, it may be a syndrome that is described. But is it really? Do you know? Are you sure? So you shouldn't put in a syndrome instead of the different symptoms if you're not sure that that's actually what it is. And also about drug information, it's important to put that in correctly, as we heard also, that if you have drug information, data, drug names, they are spelled differently, they're misspelled, and you don't code them into the correct spelling, they are impossible to search for. So that's why you need to put in correct information about drugs and reaction in particular. And when you are sitting there with your case reports, you may have the chance to go back to a report, not always. And you should do that if you're not certain, if you don't understand what they mean. If they have reported, as I have seen, local reaction. What is a local reaction? Then you should go back to report and say, what kind of local reaction? Is it a local skin reaction? Oh yes, that's what I mean. Okay, fine. And if you don't understand the data, and particularly adverse reaction terms, and then they are sent on to us to be stored in vigiBase, we have less chance of finding out and understanding the reaction terms than you have. So you should go back and request information so that you will understand the case. Should all data in your database be forwarded to other databases? Well, in principle, yes. But there's an issue about confidentiality. You may have the information about name and address of the reporter and of the patient. But there are confidentiality issues here, and the rules are different in different countries. So you have to adhere to your rules in your country. I've seen examples of case reports where you don't only ask for the identification of the reporter, but of the patient. And that creates a problem with confidentiality. And the one you should go back to is the reporter, if it's a physician or a pharmacist who have reported, not the patient. Now we heard about patient reporting, and of course that's a different issue, where the patient is also a reporter. But in most systems where patient can report on online on a website, there is a tick box that the patient can tell if they want their details to be stored or not. They may not want to be contacted back for more information. But otherwise, when you are forwarding data to vigiBase or to manufacturers or to anybody else who has an interest in it, you should make sure to forward all information. There are laws in different countries, for example, the EU laws, that are rather strict, and we adhere to that. So in vigiBase, no information about the reporter, other than type of profession, or the patient, other than age and sex, is stored in vigiBase. And there may be some sensitive information in case narratives that we don't forward to third parties. There are very strict rules in some countries, for example in the US. And the American case reports in vigiBase don't contain all the information we would want, but that's due to their very strict confidentiality laws. You can't have data that remotely can identify the patient. So even age and sex and can be restricted information, because if the patient had an unusual disease and were treated with an unusual drug, you may be able to identify the patient, and that's not allowed. Does it mean that poor case reports are not useful? No, it doesn't. We heard in the session about signal detection with Pia Kaduf, and you've heard about reporting forms from Nadia, what type of information we need. And Pia talked about index cases. So we may have 2 cases that are very well described, but we have additional information that adds to the picture, and those case reports are also needed. I had a question the other day asking, do you really need all those reports about QRTEM that we have? And I looked it up in the database to find out how many cases on QRTEM we have in the UMC database of the 9 million cases. Can you guess how many we have? 220. That's not a lot. And it's a good example. I think that's a good example of the problem with reporting on antimalarials and medicines that are used in the African region or in other developing countries. The reporting is not great there, and we need every single case to get a picture of what's happening there. So even if the cases are not very well described, we do want them. Now I'll talk a bit about how we measure quality in the WHO database from those general aspects of quality. There are several quality parameters. 10 on this picture. I won't talk about all of them. A team from our research department has recently made an article and written an article in Drug Safety about quality parameters. And if you're interested in quality, I would recommend to read it. It's fairly easy reading. Sometimes their publications contain a lot of statistics, and it's difficult to understand, but this one doesn't. They describe all these 10 quality parameters. And some of them I will talk a bit about. Conformity is important. That what I've talked about before, about an adverse reaction should be according to the terminology you're using. The drug name should be according to the drug dictionary you're using. You should have other control vocabularies so that you can't type in information that's not correct and can't be interpreted by the database. So you can't search on it. Consistency. That means that if you have birth year of the patient, say born 1999, and the onset of the reaction was in 1992, then the data is not consistent. It doesn't make sense. But most of all, we talk about completeness. And that's what we measure. And some of you may have seen our measurements of completeness of the reports. And we call that vigiGrade. It's a completeness score. Some of you may have seen it, some have not. It's a way of measuring the amount of information in each case report. It doesn't measure if the information is accurate. It doesn't measure consistency, but it measures the amount of information. So each report gets a score between 0 and 1. And it's calculated out of 9 parameters. So in each parameter, if the information is filled in, yes, then it's a 1. If it's not filled in, it's a 0. It doesn't take into account what information is there, but that the information is filled in. And then a calculation is made from all these parameters to a total score. That's a statistical measurement, a total score for each case. For those of you who, and these are the parameters included. For those of you who have seen this completeness score, you may notice that there is something about dose here. And that's new. That's not been implemented yet, but we will make a new version of the completeness score where we also have dose included. You may see that there are some information that would be useful, but it's not included here. And that's re-challenge and de-challenge. And the reason why we don't include that in the completeness score is that very few cases contain that information. It would be useful, but doesn't contain the information, and therefore, in most cases, the score would be 0, and that's not terribly helpful. But what we do is to make a graph of these different parameters. And this is an example where the different parameters are separated, so it's clear and you can see. So here you have a timeline. And we make the measure every quarter for each country. On the scale, you have the completeness score from 0 to 1. This gap here means that we didn't get any reports from this particular country in this quarter, and therefore there's a gap. Oh, that's technical mistake. How do we use this? Well, as I mentioned, sorry. As I mentioned, we make up these completeness scores for all the case reports in the database. Each single case report is measured. We make a document about this, giving the average result, some comparison with other countries, and explaining what the different parameters mean. We send this to all reporting countries twice a year, not more often than twice a year, because the measurement should be fairly stable and doesn't change all that much over each quarter. But only if we have more than 100 case reports. As I mentioned, this is a statistical measure, so if there are very few reports, the scores would go up and down a lot. And visualize, that you learned about the other day. Every single case has a completeness score, and that you can find that in the list of reports in Visualize. I don't know. I see a nodding face. I'm not sure if you noticed, but in the list of case reports, there is a completeness score for each one of them, which means you can pick out the ones that seem to be filled in and analyze those. How is this useful? Well, you can use it in developing better reporting forms. You discussed reporting forms yesterday. To make sure you have all the fields that are needed to give a full case report and a well-documented case. We can recognize technical problems because what we measure is the completeness in vigiBase, not in your database. So there may be a technical problem in the forwarding of reports, and I'll show you an example. You can use it as educational material. I have an example already where we made completeness scores that are going to be used in a meeting with pharmacists in their reporting to point out what the important issues are. And when you make a change, improve educational material or your database or your reporting form, you can have a look and see, does it make any difference? This is an example of the technical problem I mentioned. This is an actual score from one country. And they found that outcome wasn't filled in. But they said, well, we have outcome in most of our cases. So that's very strange. Then they went back and found a technical problem, that information wasn't forwarded to vigiBase. And then they actually took the trouble to change that and also to resend all the case reports. That's why it looks a bit strange here, that all the cases are in 2011. They were sent. So now we have outcome on all the cases. And that's one way to use these completeness scores. We can show an effect of a format change. This is an example of a country that had an old database that they have created themselves. And then they changed to the E2B format, where they had more complete reports. This is a striking example of the change. It's not always that striking, but a good database is necessary. And I'll finish off with a nice graph, which shows actually, in principle, all the three aspects of the quality: quantity, quality, and timeliness. On this scale here, we have number of reports per million inhabitants, and it's a log scale because the number of reports vary a lot between countries. On this scale, we have quality from 0 to 1, and each blob here represents one country. And a big blob means that they report often, more than 10 times during a year. This is 2013. And a small blob if it's less than 10. And frequent reporting means, in principle, timeliness, that we get the reports regularly. It's an interesting pattern, not so easy to interpret. I don't know actually if you can see them, but the pale blue ones here are the ones where we have more than 100 reports per million inhabitants, and that's roughly a rough figure where we think you have an effective reporting system. We set a goal to try to get a completeness score over 0.65. And most of the countries that are there are actually European countries. They've been doing pharmacovigilance for some of them 50 years now. So if you're not in that group, you shouldn't be too bothered about that. And also, of course, in EU, there are regulations about reporting, and that increases the quality. They are also using the E2B format, all of them, because they have to. But then we can see also the different colors here shows the region. And there are several countries in the African region and some other countries that have a very high completeness score, but not so many reports yet. And sometimes we're actually wondering, if you're up here, whether we actually get all the case reports or only the ones that are well filled in. But as I told you, we want all the reports, regardless of quality. The higher quality, the better, but we want all the case reports. And that's it.